Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Rivenbark. We're looking at a passage today from Psalm 46, verses 1 through 7. So our theme for the week is we're going to call city life, but today I want to talk about how God provides for and protects his people. So there's this concept in the Psalms referred to as the city of God. So 75 out of 150 Psalms refer to Jerusalem as the city of God, the mountain of God, or the city of Zion. Any mention of these concepts infer that God dwells in that city or in the city with his people, and he protects them. References to Zion or God's mountain or God's city also imply that benefits that come from the covenant that God made with Abraham and then later again with David. Just as God promised Abraham that he would become a nation, God also promised David that his lineage would forever rule as kings over that nation. And God promised that he himself would rule over Israel through David's lineage. It's important for us to understand that references in the Psalms to Jerusalem or to David's kingly lineage or to Mount Zion connect to a group of concepts. So there's several pieces that it ties together. One, it talks about protection from trouble, the provision of God, God ruling over and judging the nations. And we'll learn more about what is called the Zion tradition a little bit later in the week. So in the biblical times, cities were a place of protection. So cities provided refuge from storms, protection from robbers and thieves, protection from wild animals, and especially protection from enemy nations. All of these dangers were present outside of the walls of the city, but anybody who lived inside of the city had the benefits of the city. The lifeline, though, of the city was its food and water supply. Having wells in the city or a river flowing directly into the city was not only extremely convenient, it also meant that when people went to draw water, they didn't have to leave the protection of the city walls in order to do so. And so when cities were attacked, one of the most effective methods of taking the city was to place the city under siege. So stopping the food supply and the water supply created these extreme conditions for the people inside the city. Even today, we will use things like embargoes to keep food from coming into a country, to put pressure on them because it creates problems. It doesn't just weaken the fighting people, the ones who are fighting that need strength to defend the city. It affects entire families, physically and psychologically. There's a lot of psychology that goes into this. So a city under siege is fighting fatigue and fear as well as an invading army. And so when we get this verbiage that there is a city or a river flowing into the city of God, that it brings joy to people, we understand that anybody in the city gets the benefits of living in the city. So our Western civilization focuses more on the individual than a collective group. So it's easy to miss this perspective of how God's promises, his provision, his protection extend to this collective group, in this case to the nation of Israel. Or the imagery of this psalm, the benefits extend to all the people of the city as a whole. In the New Testament, believers are in covenant with God through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Galatians 3:9 says, also, we are adopted, Romans 8:15. That means we get the benefits of the covenant of Abraham and David. We are all, as believers, we're all in the city. Regardless of what a person has done in the past or how long that person has been a believer or whether that person feels worthy of it, every person who's in the city of God receives all the benefits just like everybody else. So a river flowing into a city means provision for the people. A river flowing into the city not only represents daily provision of our needs, but also reflects the character of God, who is loving, faithful, and consistent in his care. A river flowing into a city means protection from a siege. Should invaders attack, knowing that God protects all of his people gives us strength and hope during times when we are fighting the enemy. So, Jay, let's look at a couple of things. How does knowing that God protects and provides give us hope in our normal everyday life?
Well, as a believer, that's foundational. You're not facing life alone, on your own. This whole concept of city, I think, is very significant in that a city, the one that's referred to over and over. I think you said 75 out of the 150 Psalms, so make some reference to it. A city is an actual place with actual people. I think it should remind us the concept that God is real. He dwells. He's everywhere, but he dwells somewhere, and we will be a part of that. Um, I've been born and raised in the country all my life. I wouldn't consider myself a city guy, but this concept that you're talking about in the passage for today's reading talks about things like refuge and strength and protection. And I think the thing that I've taken away out of this concept primarily has been not just is it a place with God that we will be, and you talked about the benefits of being there, but it's about community. It's not just individuals. I think we tend to look at Christianity oftentimes and our relationship, our salvation as, okay, this is a me and God thing exclusively. It is in that aspect, but it's so much bigger. It's about community, people being together. It's about mutual benefits and safety and protection that God affords, in this picture, because it is a visual picture as you read through these scriptures. I see this majestic city. I see people there in perfect unity and harmony and peace and happiness and mutual benefit for one another, where God is ruling. And to think that God is our refuge and our protection is that's overwhelming. I mean, I like the concept and the feeling, knowing that we have a police force, we have a sheriff's department, we have national protection, we have military, have all those things. But none of those things even collectively compare to the protection and provision that God can offer us as part of it.
And it's interesting. We think collectively more from a nationality than we do from a spirituality standpoint.
Yeah.
We sing songs like "I'm proud to be an American," but we don't think about. I recall as a kid, my dad he would say one of his favorite songs, and occasionally he'd bust out with it in a church service, and I have no idea who wrote it because it would have been a more modern song then. So we're talking 40, 50 years ago. I don't think it qualifies as a hymn, but the song goes, I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. And he would say, that's one of my greatest privileges in life is to be a part of the family of God. In America, we live in a very individualistic society anyway.
Yep.
You talked about living in the country. And I think some of that individualism points us to an individualistic Christianity, and we miss some of this connection, the importance of connection. You've heard me talk about going to Germany, and one of the things that stuck out to me while I was in Germany is that they required people to live in villages or towns, something very similar to this. They weren't walled. I mean, there were a couple of places that were, but those walls had been built long ago. But you could own land anywhere you wanted to, right? You could own all the land you wanted to and farm it, but your house had to be inside a village. Okay. You couldn't live on that land. You had to live in a village, because they were intentional about creating community. They knew the value of it to your health, physical health, mental health, maybe even spiritual health. All of those things are important. And as challenging as people are, left to our own devices, we're worse off in so many ways.
Yeah, and I'm thinking even as it relates to communion, for instance, a spiritual application. I see the local church as a micro image of what he talks about the city of God, where collectively people are together for common cause, reason, purpose, where God is the central focus of that. And even at communion, I think it's important and this may seem strange to some folks, that the focus is not, excuse me, it's not just about the redemptive work that Christ has done for us. That's preeminent, has to be. But the other side of that equation is that we are now collectively in the same family, that we have each other, and that we should be sharing life together, sharing our burdens, protecting, adding value to the life of others. And I think communion should be intentional about both of those aspects.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where the word comes from.
It's common union.
Common union.
Yeah.
We have to recognize that. We should look around. You know, I often think about what it would be like to have sat around that Last Supper table. You know, it was a mix of there was a mix of commitment.
True.
We have Judas, who has already betrayed Jesus. I mean, he's already sold out. You got Peter, who's going to deny him, you know, and Jesus tells him he's going to do that. You got John, who's super affectionate, and you got others who kind of lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying, this is the thing that ties you all together.
Yeah, and collectively, though, like I said, they all had their strengths and they had their significant weaknesses, but collectively as a group, you know, the impact they were able to have for the kingdom, particularly after the crucifixion and resurrection, was overwhelming. You know, and I think those are all glimpses of what we should be seeing in when we talk about whether it's New Jerusalem, City of God, etc., that there is a huge emphasis on other people together, not just individually.
The river in Scripture, not just in this passage, is a symbol of God's provision, His protection. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the river is so important?
I tried to conceptualize in my mind, reading through this and other places where he talks about rivers, and even in the New Jerusalem, the river of life flowing. To me, when I think of rivers, I think of serenity, peaceful, tranquil place. But it's also a place of substance. I mean, where you draw water from. It's provisions in just like we have water all around us that's full of fish and abundance of things. Yeah. And you can make a spiritual application of that. Some of those can mixed in.
Yeah.
You get some crabs.
Off limits. Yeah. But in this case, the crabs would have been off limits.
Yeah. And, you know, think about even the season as we're recording this, you know, we're in pretty much a drought season. But a river makes available even irrigation that's life-sustaining. And so there are many applications when you talk about a river and its benefits, you know.
I think you've been out west around Albuquerque and all, and they have these, what sometimes will be referred to as dry rivers. You know, just these big concrete wells. One of the things I tell people is if the water comes in here, like if we get flooded, it goes away pretty quick because there's somewhere for it to go.
Right.
But in places where you don't have a river and you suddenly get this deluge of rain, they have to build places for it to go because if they don't, it overwhelms them.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen multiple shows in what you're talking about, dry river beds and streams, and all of a sudden you have a flash storm or rain, and oftentimes people get swept away by those things because they're not prepared for it. And so there are a lot of connotations when you think through the process about what river means.
Yeah, and I think about, you know, Jesus would say, out of your belly will flow rivers of living water. It's this constant theme.
Yeah.
But as we were just talking, the same stream, same river, same water that provides cleansing for me, food for me, refreshment for me, even recreation for me. There may be a sermon in that, you know, an alliterated sermon, refreshment, renewal. But that same river can also, you talked about, wash people away. Yeah. People can drown in it.
Absolutely.
It reminds me that the same presence and provision of God also brings judgment.
Can be absolutely judgment or a destructive force.
Yeah.
Either way.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around the book of Psalms.